All right, I think this would be a good time to stop and do a little bit of art. And we're going to do some really basic art. So if I hit Control G here and I move this around, you can see that we have our ball, we have a location where we can win our game, and we've played a particle effect indicating that something has happened. I'm thinking maybe the next few tutorials we'll do a main menu that lets you go into the game and maybe a win-lose screen, all that good stuff. But for now, I'm thinking we can maybe help do a little bit of simple modeling and texturing for this ball to make it look a little bit different than this. So I'm going to fire up Blender. Alright, so here we are in Blender. Now, in order to accurately figure out like how big I should make this ball, I should really bring my import in my game board. So if you remember last time, what we did in our scene is we created a folder called Marble Game, and inside that Marble Game folder we have a folder called Environment, and this is where our game board FBX is. What I did was I went open an Explorer, and if you recall this Environment Marble Game folder, what I did is I right clicked and I went to Send to Desktop, and I created a shortcut. So every time I go to the desktop now, you can see that there is a Marble Game folder. Now this is the one that I just created, that duplicate, but you can see there's one here. Now if I go into Blender and I do File Import, and I'm going to get an FBX, and I'm going to just go ahead and navigate to my desktop here and grab that Marble Game shortcuts folder, and let's go to Environment, and there's our game board. Now you could see roughly the size of our board. What I'm going to do here is hit G and Z with that cube selected and just move it up for a second. And we don't necessarily need our light, and we don't need our camera. So I'm going to actually rename this to Marble. And one way that I always love to create out of my out of cubes, my cylinders and spheres and things like that. The reason for that is because if we look at the standard sphere that comes out of Blender or Maya or whatever, the topology isn't always, it's not made all in quad. So let me turn this on for a second so you could see this. And so here's our wireframe. If I hit Shift A and I go to Mesh and I add a UV sphere, and I drag this up for a second, you can see that it consists of unevenly spaced geometry. It tends to get thinner and smaller, and then it becomes triangles when it gets to this point. This actually gives pretty poor lighting. So if I turn this back off for a second, you could see the lighting isn't evenly dispersed, even if I shade smooth. Come on, let me shade smooth. There you go. It causes the lighting as I go around the sphere to pinch at that point. So what I tend to do here is I'll hit Control and 2. What you'll notice is it creates a sphere that's all quads. I'm going to hit S to scale this up just a little bit. And when I right click and I hit Shade Smooth, even though it's a little faceted, it still has evenly distribution of lighting. It doesn't necessarily pinch at that point. Now also the poly count of this is much smaller than something like this, right? So see if I can bring back the here, let me hit N to hide this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. If you want, you can hit Control 3 to make it even smoother. Because our game doesn't necessarily have a lot of stuff, we could go this smooth. So you may be wondering, well, when you're hitting Control 1, 2, and 3, is this actual geometry? So if I hit Tab and I go to Edit mode, you're like, oh, it's not actual geometry. It's almost like this kind of, if you were to think about Maya, subdivision modeling type thing, sub-D modeling type setup. So in order to apply this, if you go to these modifiers wrench here, you could see that it applied it here. Now there's two ways to do this. You can hit Control and A as you hover your cursor over, or Shift A, is it? Apply. Oh, you have to make sure you're in object mode. So it is Control A to apply this, or you can just click this little arrow here and then hit apply, and that'll apply it. So now we have a marble, And I'm going to look at the scale of it on this surface. It's a little bit too big, so I'm going to hit S to scale this down. And I want it to not surpass the edge of the board unless the player really wants to flip the marble over. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hide the visibility of that game board. And I'm going to hit Control Shift and S. Oops. Or Shift S rather. And I want to move my selection to my, it's a selection to cursor. And then there's all these other options. There's cursor to selected, cursor to active, selection to grid, all this stuff. So if I click this, notice that it goes to my 3D cursor, which is in the center. All right, so now that we're there, what I'd like to do is also unwrap this so that I can texture it. So let's first hit Z and let's go to material preview. And you could see that it's just white because it doesn't really have a material on it. And if I go over here to my material properties, you can see that, oh, actually it does have a material and it's just this white material here. And I'm going to rename this marble underscore MTRL. So there's my marble material. And if I go to my UV editing here and I tick this on so I could see it, it is unwrapped, but it's not unwrapped properly. Generally with spherical unwraps like this, what you want to do is you want to have it split almost like one of those classic maps. I'm going to pause the video and open up what I mean, an example of what I mean by that. So what I find is this sort of effect where there's the two hemispheres kind of cut down a specific section and then unfolded provides like the cleanest results for something that's spherical. So it helps to show the flat information. So you can see here's all these continents and how they're laid out flat. So inside of here, what I'm going to do is just hit, so we're in UV, I'm sorry, I want to go to, UV editing. And if you don't see these dots or anything, you want to make sure that you're in edit mode. So I'm hitting tab to go to edit mode here. So what you want to do is go to face mode. I'm going to select face mode. I'm going to press A to select all of the faces. If I press U, you can see there's all these options, which is to unwrap. And what I'd like to do is mark a seam down the center here. So let's go ahead and press 2. I'm going to hold Alt, and you'll notice it. If I hold Alt and I click down the center, it selected all of the edges down the center of my model. Now I want to deselect half of it. If I'm not in view and I try to do that by holding Control to deselect and swiping, you can see I'm not grabbing that line, right? So what I can do is turn on X-ray mode, which is this guy right here. And if there's two ways to access it. You can click this button or you can hit Alt Z. And all I'm going to do is deselect half of those edges. So holding Control, you can see I'm deselecting those edges, and now I have this guy back here. And what I can do is mark a seam or a cut back here. So I'm going to bring up that menu by hitting U in here, and I'm going to go down here and hit mark seam. And you could see that it added a cut or a seam down the back here. Now what this does is this tells Blender that what I'd like to do is re-unwrap this model, but I'd like to use this seam as the place to stretch it out or cut it. So let me go ahead and hit 3 to go to face mode again, or click this. Press A to select all of that. And when I go back in here, I'm going to just hit U in this thing here, and I'm going to hit unwrap. And now you can see that it unwrapped it very much like that Earth example that I was showing you earlier. Now, what I'd like though is this is the bottom, and then this is the top of my seam. So inside of here, I'm going to hit A to select all, and then R to rotate, and then 9-0. And what you'll see is it rotated at 90 degrees. So let's hit A one more time, and then G, and I'm just going to place it in here. Something like this. I'm going to hit S to scale that down just a little bit more. All right, now I'm going to tab over and go to object mode. Oops. In here, tab over, go to, well, let's leave this in UV editing mode. And then I'm just going to go to texture painting. So you can see. Now, as much as we've applied a material, we've done all that stuff, one of the key issues here is we don't actually have a texture applied. And so when we're in texture painting mode, Blender tends to, Blender will add a pinkish color to your model, indicating that it does not have a, doesn't have a texture attached to it. So let's take a look at how we can add some textures. So you can see here there's no textures. If I click this plus sign, I can add a base color, and let's make the base color of our marble a darkish gray. So something like this. Then let's hit, it says marble material base color. I'm just going to actually just name this marble base color. And then hit OK. Now you can see it's got a gray to it. I'd like to make it reflective like a marble. So there's a couple other attributes I'd like to add. I'd like to add a roughness map. And you could see here is this sort of light or neutral color. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And what I'd like to do, let's make sure that we are in material preview here. There we go. Now you can see it's got a nice specularity. Now let's go ahead and add a metallic map, and I'm going to leave that at black. I'm going to hit OK. Now let's talk a little bit about each one of these maps. Base color, and remember we're in texture paint here. Let's say I wanted to paint maybe a smiley face on this thing. So I'm going to go down to yellow here, and as I draw, you can see it updates. So something like this. Now the majority of the geometry is actually in the little front part here. So what we can do is, and I can press F to adjust my brush size, is just sort of paint in something like this. I can also paint directly on the front of my model here. And this might get a little bit annoying in our game, but for now this will have to do. We can also go with a little bit of some white here. And let's go ahead and grab a black color. Alright, so we've got a little smiley face. Now let's say I'd like this thing to be a little bit more reflective. If I switch over to my roughness texture here, what I can do is I can actually fill this map with different shades. So you can see when I go to all the way to white, let's bring this out just a little bit, or I go all the way to black, it becomes completely reflective. And that's what roughness is essentially there to help do. So if I go to my metallic, for example, and I make this one all the way white, you can see it removes all of that soft specularity. So what I might do is just really kind of go a little more, add a little bit more of my specularity there, and then I just kind of dial back the amount of shininess that I want, or reflection I should say, to my environment. So here we have kind of like a marble. Now what I can do from here, the way that I can save all of these maps out is under base color, I can hit Control and S, and let's see, let's go to our desktop, let's go to our marble game shortcut. Here's environment. I'm actually going to make a new folder and call it marble, and this is where I'm going to export out this marble, and then within this I'll just call this textures, and I will oh, actually looks like I need to save my texture. So I'm going to click in here, and I'm going to hit Alt S to save this texture. And then I will navigate to the desktop. I will find that marble game folder, marble textures, and this is a PNG. I tend to use Targas because it saves the alpha information in the alpha channel instead of as one complete file. I don't actually have any alpha information on this guy, so I'm just going to do RGB. So there's nothing transparent on it. And I'm just going to name this, actually I could just hit save image. It should save it with that base color material. Let's go to our roughness, Alt S, and let's do marble material roughness. Let's go back over here. I don't think it's saved. It looks like it did. Okay, good. So then Alt S on our metallic. And then actually, let me grab this. And let's rename this. Oops. I might have to rename it later. And it looks like I also forgot to, let's see. It looks like I saved that last one as a PNG. Let's see if we could save off a copy. And then let's actually export our sphere. And then I'll just go ahead and rename them. It's not a big deal. So let's go to FBX here. And remember, we have our game board that's not visible. So we want to do just the selected object. And I'm going to go to marble game here. And then marble. And I'm just going to name this FBX marble. Underscore SM static. And SM stands for static mesh. And then I'm going to export the FBX. All right, in the next video, we'll take a look at how we set up all of these textures and bring this into Lumberyard.